Is Moon Knight's first appearance undervalued or overvalued? Well, in this video, we're going to do a deep dive and see if we can answer that question. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we got to ask ourselves the question, is Werewolf by Night 32, first appearance of Moon Knight, overvalued or undervalued? Now, this is a question that I've definitely been pondering because we all know that the very first property we're getting this year is going to be Moon Knight on Disney+. And I'm sure I'm not alone in people thinking about if now is the right time to jump on this book. So in this video, I'm going to kind of do a deep dive into some of the fair market values and some of the numbers in comparison to other books that came out around the same time and see if we can make a determination if this book is undervalued or overvalued. But before I get into the video for today, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps support the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let us get into the topic here today, and that of course is Werewolf by Night 32 and trying to understand the values for it. Now, I made a video the other week talking about, what you should do before you decide to invest in the book. And what I talked about in that video was the importance of looking at comps when deciding on when you want to buy a certain book. So in this video, I'm going to do the same thing with you guys here, and I'm going to look at the various comparable books that associate to Moon Knight. Basically, I'm thinking first appearances of big characters that came out in the Bronze Age. That's going to be the comparables for Moon Knight. We're going to look at some of the values for those books, and we're going to compare them all along the different grade levels. And then we're going to make a determination if the book is overvalued or undervalued based on that. Now, just to be clear, I do think that no matter what happens, the book's price right now is going to go up once we get the Moon Knight show. That's just the nature of FOMO and people getting excited about, seeing Oscar Isaac play the role of Moon Knight. But I think it is really important to understand where the book sits in terms of its popularity amongst other books to really make a determination of, will this book correct after we get the show, or will this character be elevated to a new sphere? And as a result of that, will the book prices be able to hold those new fair market values? So let's kind of get into the slides here and let's kind of go through. And first off, I'm going to talk about what books we should be comparing Werewolf by Night 32 against. So the 5 books I have for comparables of Moon Knight's first appearance is going to be Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men #1, Marvel Spotlight 5, Amazing Spider-Man #129, and Tomb of Dracula #10. Now, of course, the top 2 books right there, Hulk 181 and Giant Size X-Men 1, I don't need to tell you guys, it's the first full appearance of Wolverine, and it's the first appearance of, the new X-Men team, Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, etc. Now, as we dig into the numbers and we go through the comparables, at least against those 2 books, it's my opinion that if Werewolf by Night's fair market value is rivaling or above that of Hulk 181 or Giant Size X-Men 1, you're dipping into real dangerous territory here, because to me, those are the kings of the Bronze Age. I mean, we can talk about Marvel Spotlight 9.8, put that aside, but generally speaking, when it comes to comic collectors, the comic market, people value those books the highest of the ones that came out around this time. So those are the top to me. And if Werewolf by Night is going above those, that is a bit of a warning to me. We will also be looking at the pop counts, the census counts, to see if that has any, effects on the values of things. So we will take that into consideration as well. And then the bottom row, Marvel Spotlight 5, first appearance of Ghost Rider, ASM 129, first appearance of Punisher, and Tomb of Dracula 10. To me, those are, I think, comparable characters of tier list to Moon Knight, where, depending on where Werewolf by Night 32's value is in comparison to those books, I think we can make a good determination of a risk factor when we want to grab this thing. I mean, I would make the argument that Ghost Rider and Punisher are bigger characters than Moon Knight. I certainly think that if Moon Knight is a successful show, his star power could, go up to the level of Ghost Rider or Punisher, but we just have to be a little bit cautious, with that. We have to curb our expectations and make sure that we are not getting ahead of ourselves here. Similarly, with Tomb of Dracula 10, first appearance of Blade, I think Blade, you could almost make an argument, is bigger than Moon Knight. I mean, he was a character, that was actually able to have a trilogy of films be very, very successful. I think that, in comic book collecting terms, Blade has always been a little bit below Moon Knight, but his values of his books might be an interesting floor for us to evaluate when we're thinking about, the first appearance of Moon Knight, or maybe this video is going to be an education for you guys as to why to buy Tomb of Dracula #10, because we're going to see that consistently it is the lowest price book of this tier. But let's kind of get into the first slide here, and I want to start at the top end. So up there in the upper right corner, we see CGC 9.4. This is going to be the 9.4 grade. So let's just start start with the top tier, Incredible Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men #1, and Werewolf by Night 32. And let's look at those fair market values for this book at the 9.4 grade. Now, I got these fair market values with some combination of Go Collect and GPA analysis, just kind of picking the number that sort of made sense to me. But generally speaking, this is where they sit. So Werewolf by Night 32, First Moon Knight, fair market value is $13,500 at the 9.4 grade. We see Hulk 181 sitting around the $20,000 range. And then at Giant Size X-Men #1, we see it hovering around that $14,000 range. So right off the bat, to me, I see a little bit of a red flag here where Werewolf by Night 32 is rivaling that of the price for Giant Size X-Men #1. Now, it is possible that Moon Knight becomes a character as popular as the X-Men after this show, but again, that is my first warning sign right there. But let's pull up the census count now and see if we can make sense of some of these numbers. So right off the bat, Werewolf by Night 32, we do recognize does have a lower census count than some of those other books. It makes a lot of sense. People probably weren't reading Werewolf by Night as much back in the day. You know, the series wasn't as popular as Incredible Hulk or X-Men, so there are going to be less books out there. But again, when I look at those fair market values, 13,000 in comparison to 14,000 of Giant Size X-Men #1, even though there are only half as many books on the census, it still feels risky to me as a book that I would be spending this much money on. But let's move on to like the next slide here, and let's compare this book's value at the 9.4 grade with that of Ghost Rider, Punisher, and Blade here. So pulling up the fair market values, we can see Ghost Rider, a whopping $22,000 at the 9.4 grade. I think we know why that is going to be the case because we know that those books are very, very rare in the high grade. We see ASM 129 only around $6,000 here at this grade, and then Tomb of Dracula sitting around $6,500. Now remember, Werewolf by Night 32, we see in the lower right corner, it's around that $13,500 range. Let's pull up the census counts and see if we can make sense of these numbers even further. Well, Ghost Rider right there, you see that there's only 87, so that's kind of why we start to get these weird Ghost Rider numbers at the high grade. I mean, we all know that the 9.8 sold for $250,000 last year because there's only 4 on the census. So let's kind of focus more in on Punisher and Blade here. $6,000 for Punisher. There's 751 on the census, so there's quite a few more on the census overall. And then Blade right here, we see 6,500, and it's about a comparable amount of books on the census. But this is, again, another red flag to me, where do we really feel like Moon Knight is twice as popular a character as Blade or even that of Punisher? Now, I realize there's more Punisher books on the census, but this is a classic cover, an amazing Spider-Man run. You know, people like to collect this thing. So again, the fact that this book, Werewolf by Night 32, sells for twice as much as ASM 129 and Tomb of Dracula 10, to me is another red flag. So if I'm looking at Werewolf by Night CGC 9.4s and I'm thinking about pulling the trigger on one of these books, I do have to question my judgment on this because I do really feel like if the show comes out and it's not that successful, or maybe, you know, the portrayal isn't that interesting, I feel like this book is going to correct pretty hard down to maybe some of those numbers that we see with Tomb of Dracula or Punisher, you know, maybe to the $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 range. All right, let's go to the 9.0 grade and see if we can see anything different at this level. And let's pull up those fair market values. Here we see Werewolf by Night at the 9.0, 6,500, Hulk 181, 10,500, and Giant Size X-Men 8,600. So right away at the 9.0 grade, this feels a little more proportionally in line to where I want to be with this book, at least in comparison to, you know, these X-Men titles. So let's pull up the census count here. We see 337 for Werewolf by Night, 918 for 181, and Giant Size X-Men 701. So again, Werewolf by Night, of course, is not as popular of a book. There aren't as many out there. But again, as far as like the values are concerned, like, or the census count, this doesn't feel like too big of a difference or too drastic of a difference to where I would really be that concerned. This feels right to me. So let's jump into the next slide here and see if we can compare the fair market values to these characters right here, which I think are more in line to Moon Knight. And if we look, Ghost Rider, $9,000, ASM 129, 4,200, and Tomb of Dracula 10, also 4,200. So let's pull up the census count. And this is sort of a similar situation where we're seeing Ghost Rider of all these books has the smallest census count at this grade. So that's kind of why the numbers are skewed. Then we have ASM 129 pretty high census count overall. It feels like a lot of people have graded their Punisher books. There's going to be more Spider-Man books out there. People collect these all the time. And then Tomb of Dracula 10, similar in number here. So kind of like what I said with the 9.4 grade, the fact that Moon Knight is, $2,000 more than Punisher and Blade is a little bit concerning. I mean, I think you can definitely make an argument that he is going to be that much more popular of a character, but you can also, I think, make an argument that if the show is not successful, this has a chance to correct back down to, that $4,000, $5,000 range. So this one feels like moderate risk to me, where 9.4 was, very risky. I also think that this is maybe slightly overinflated right now, and it could be slightly risky. So I would definitely be concerned if I was going to buy at this level. All right, let's go on now to like sort of the mid-grade level here, and I'm going to focus in on the 7.0. And I think this is where it starts to get, a little more interesting for opportunities with Moon Knight. So fair market value for the high-end books here, or we're going to call them the Kings of the Bronze Age, right? Incredible Hulk 181 is $6,500. Giant Size X-Men #1 is $4,700. And Werewolf by Night 32 is $2,600 at this CGC 7.0 range. So again, proportionally, this feels okay to me. Like I feel comfortable, looking at those numbers. If we look at the census count here, it feels pretty proportional overall to what it was in the past. So generally speaking, as this book compares to Hulk 181 and Giant Size X-Men 1, I actually think this is pretty okay. I actually feel pretty comfortable looking at those numbers in comparison. So let's focus in on the real true comparables, which is Ghost Rider, Punisher, and Blade, of course. Fair market value for these ones right here, we see Ghost Rider sitting at that $3,000 range, Punisher the $2,300, and Tomb of Dracula 10 at the $2,000 range. Let's quickly pull up the census counts to see if anything sticks out. So here we see Ghost Rider. This is when, the census count for this book starts to get more in line with its contemporaries. We now are up to 413. So this is now, we see the numbers more in proportion to where they should be. Punisher, again, still a very high census count in comparison. And Tomb of Dracula always going to sort of be in line with that of Werewolf by Night 32. But when I look at these numbers, all these numbers basically feel pretty comparable to me overall as far as where this character sits in comparison to others. And I actually think that, there's maybe opportunity at this grade level. Like if we think that Werewolf by Night is going to be very, very successful as a show, and this character is going to, surge up into the market, maybe he can one day become as popular as Ghost Rider right there. So maybe this book does rise up to, that $3,000 range eventually. But overall, I think that, at worst case scenario, if the show tanks and Moon Knight sinks back down to Blade levels, we're not going to lose that much. We're not going to leave that much on the table. So maybe it corrects back down to $2,000. So at the 7.0 range, I feel like this book is pretty much in line. And maybe you can make an argument that it is undervalued if you're someone who is very bullish on the Moon Knight character. But that's kind of the mid-grade level. Let's look at the low-grade level and focus in on the 4.0. So similarly, we're going to pull up the fair market values for these books right here, Kings of the Bronze Age. We see fair market value for Werewolf by Night 32, $1,400, 181, $3,800, Giant Size X-Men 1, $3,300. Pop counts, does anything really stick out? No, still pretty proportional overall. There's always going to be like twice as many 181s and Giant Size X-Men 1s generally on the market. So that this feels right to me as far as like popularity of characters, how much these books are in demand, what the values are, etc. So let's take a look at the next rung here. And the next rung, we're going to pull up the fair market values. We see Ghost Rider is $1,300 here at this level, Punisher $1,450, and Blade $1,000. And then census counts similarly, again, kind of in line to sort of each other. Nothing really sticks out to me personally in this slide. This all feels pretty comparable, and kind of like the 7.0 range. I actually look at the number for Werewolf by Night 32 sitting at 1,400. Being lower than that of Punisher sounds good to me. Being around the same level as Ghost Rider sounds pretty good to me. And then of course Blade, maybe there's an opportunity for Blade right there. But generally speaking, this feels okay to buy at this price range in comparison to these other books. Like especially if we think Moon Knight is going to be elevated to a new tier of superhero, I feel comfortable spending that amount of money if this is one of my favorite characters, or if I'm someone who wants to invest in this book. Maybe this book corrects back down to that Tomb of Dracula number, down to the $1,000 range. But generally speaking, that feels like a calculated risk to me, where I think that, maybe this could be a $2,000 book sometime in the future. So kind of recapping where we are with seeing this book in comparison to others and thinking about it across different grade levels, let's see if we can make some conclusions about the various grades right here. So at the high end for Werewolf by Night 32, you know, when we think about those CGC 9.4s, I personally think of it as being something of a high risk. I think it is very risky when you're looking at the same price point to this book as that of Giant Size X-Men #1. Similarly, at the CGC 9.0 level, I think that there is some risk here. I mean, I feel like it goes a little more in proportion to where it wants to be, but it is also twice as more expensive as Punisher and Blade. So that does feel somewhat risky in my opinion. Then when we go to like the mid grade and the low grade, I actually find that there is opportunity at these levels. I think in the CGC 7.0, there's definitely opportunity there to, you know, have this book grow over time. It feels like it could be a safer investment, you know, especially if we're comparing it to some of those other characters. And then similarly at the 4.0 range, it feels like it's a book right in line to where it wants to be, knowing that we're going to be getting him in the MCU and compared to characters who are not necessarily coming in the MCU. It feels like a decent floor to get in on, and that entry level seems, you know, pretty safe overall if you ask me. So again, is Werewolf by Night 32 overvalued or undervalued? Well, it actually depends on what grade you're looking at. In my opinion, on the high grade, I think the book is overvalued, and on the low grade, I think there's an argument to be made that the book is undervalued. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Are you guys excited for Moon Knight? What are you thinking about Werewolf by Night 32? Are you someone who wants to get your hands on this book? Are you a fan of the character? Do you think some of the other books are overvalued or undervalued, as, you know, comparing them to each other? Maybe Blade is a really big opportunity for a lot of people out there. Anyways, drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next video.